Now, originally published earlier this year, Maritime Disputes has fast become a crucial book on the many energy issues and dynamics that impact the Eastern Mediterranean. Written by Dr. Baroudi, who is the current CEO of Energy and Environment Holding and boasts 40 years of experience in the energy industry, to include in support of project and program development with the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and others. Maritime Disputes offers insights into an issue that intersects with the likes of maritime boundaries, exclusive economic zones, and offshore energy exploration and development. A very complex series of issues. And indeed, when thinking of the Eastern Mediterranean more broadly, one cannot help but to think of the late Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great theorist about naval power that is adhered to so much by the United States Navy. That, quote, "The history of sea power is largely, though by no means solely, a narrative of contests between nations and of mutual rivalries," unquote. So be it the Phoenicians establishing their trading network in the Mediterranean, the battle for supremacy between Carthage and Rome, or the Romans who would term the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum, our sea, the North African campaign in World War II, or the humanitarian crises of irregular migration around and through the Mediterranean, that sea has long served as both a literal crossroads and a theater for competition and conflict. More so in 2009 with the discovery of natural gas. The region has now been under very heavy scrutiny and increasing contestation, driving further competition among a handful of the countries along the periphery and in the Mediterranean itself: France, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and Lebanon. The Eastern Mediterranean now has often been seen as an area primed for potential instability and even escalation or worse, conflict, and we hope it doesn't come to that. Recognizing the precarious nature of the region, then, it's with the greatest enthusiasm and interest that we should all celebrate these new translations of the book, Maritime Disputes. Available now for readers in French, in Arabic, and Greek. Maritime Disputes offers important access and insights for the many policymakers, researchers, and scholars who are considering this very complex and even complicated matter. I have no doubt that in time, Maritime Disputes will be considered an essential global research as nations continue to deliberate on the matters of the Eastern Mediterranean and energy security, and more broadly, the security nature of the interaction of societies in that region.
Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean is proudly distributed to the trade by the Brookings Institution Press. And for over 100 years, the press has helped bring knowledge and research by scholars to a wider audience of readers, researchers, students, and policymakers. The books we publish and distribute inform with clarity and persuade with conviction. And Dr. Baroudi's new book is one such publication. I'm wholly impressed by the original thinking, comprehensive research, and convincing rhetoric employed by Dr. Baroudi to make his case for maritime boundary delimitation in the Eastern Mediterranean. Maritime Disputes has turned a new page for the Brookings Institution Press. The ebook is available in French, Arabic, and Greek, and it is the first publication within the press available in multiple languages. In conclusion, I, along with our director, Bill Finan, and our team here at the press, offer our heartfelt congratulations to Dr. Baroudi, the Transatlantic Leadership Network, and the team behind the scenes for this accomplishment. And like all of our publications, I'm sure this book will inspire thoughtful conversation.
I did not invent the solutions discussed in the book. That was the work of dedicated diplomats, lawyers, scientists, and economists. Instead, I have merely tried to describe the tools that we have today. They have made available to spread awareness, to disseminate knowledge of the future they make possible. It's not just the makers and implementers of government policy who need to know about maritime boundaries and how to resolve them peacefully. It's everyone who cares about living in a world governed by clear and consistent rules rather than raw power. It's anyone who understands that sound public policy can be perfectly consistent with the profit motive, anyone who believes in the possibility of peace, security, and anyone who accepts the obligation that each generation has to the next, i.e., to leave our world in a better and safer state than we found it. Most of all, I wrote this book for those who refuse to be taken by the notion that difference is destiny.
We have 5 priority issues, policy issues, efforts in my bureau, and the Eastern Mediterranean is one of those. So we invest a lot of time and effort in understanding the developments in the region and promoting those positive developments because we see it as an important means of improving energy diversification and growth, but also improving political cooperation in the region. Let me congratulate Dr. Baroudi for your book. It's an honor to be on the panel with you. In the Eastern Med, we work very closely with the countries of the Eastern Med. We have very, very strong working relationships with a number of countries on these issues. Other countries are not quite in a place to participate and cooperate, but we still maintain dialogue with them, constantly encouraging them to take the right path of cooperation rather than confrontation. I was in Cairo in January for the Eastern Med Gas Forum, a really significant new development in the region. Minister El Molla, Steinitz, Hatzidakis, and Lakotripis were all there, the members of the Eastern Med Gas Forum. It was my first chance to join that group, and I was really impressed by the easy cooperation and conversations among these ministers on sometimes difficult issues, and their commitment to moving forward on issues that bring benefits to all their countries. So it was a very impressive initiative, and I should remind folks that this was an initiative of these countries. This is not something that the US, as we sometimes do, has a great idea and goes out and puts together these kinds of things. The Eastern Med Gas Forum was created by these countries because they recognize the opportunities ahead of them, and they recognize the importance of very, very high-level cooperation among these countries if they're going to achieve their goals in the region. U.S. vision for the region is one that is peaceful, productive, and embraces the positive development of energy resources in the Eastern Med. We want our partners to prosper from energy development. We want to see the resources in the Eastern Med contribute to energy security, not just for the members who have the energy resources, but for other countries in the region to benefit from these new sources of energy. The region is fortunate that they have the components to really make this work. Thriving energy sector, significant natural resource endowment, as we're learning as exploration goes on. Dynamic and growing markets among them, and a good framework of production and infrastructure, which will help with future development. But I think we'll get to this probably later, but in even prior to COVID-19 and the reduction of demand, the energy market's a tough market. It's very, very competitive now. And especially in areas like natural gas with the emergence of LNG and a number of other producers, gas prices are very, very competitive. And so those are some of the challenges that the region has to deal with. And I think it would be good if we talk about some of the things that the countries in the region can do to make themselves more competitive.
One specific issue that we're already looking at with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean is marine debris and plastic waste, because plastic pollution continues to be a significant contributor to the decline of the health of the marine environment. Although the Mediterranean accounts for less than 1% of the world's ocean waters, it holds 7% of the microplastics. More than 200 million tourists in normal years, unfortunately this is not one of those, visit the Mediterranean shores, and the countries in the Mediterranean depend on tourism income and fisheries, as is known extremely well. So we appreciate again the attention to the science and the environment that affects the context for these discussions. So far, unilateral actions have not been enough to address the threat to regional economy posed by marine debris and plastic waste. We would like to see more joint efforts, and the spirit of broader cooperation in the Eastern Med is something obviously we would like to foster in any way that we can. With regard to boundary disputes, they obviously have created tensions for many years. Tensions among some states have intensified with efforts to explore for and exploit hydrocarbon resources in the region. The United States generally does not take a position on other states' maritime boundary disputes. We urge all states to resolve their maritime disputes peacefully and in accordance with international law. We encourage all parties to act with restraint and refrain from actions that increase tensions in this region and other regions. Energy resource development in the Eastern Mediterranean should foster cooperation among the neighbors and provide a foundation for durable energy security and economic prosperity.
I think that all of our panelists here today can agree that if all parties in the Eastern Mediterranean are to ever fully benefit from the exploitation of these resources and any future ones, and that could include development of renewables, for example, a new pragmatic approach must be implemented. And that none of us, I think, on this panel, myself included, are under any illusion that such agreements will lead to a resolution of intractable hundreds of year-old disagreements between these countries. In short, we're not really looking for peace in our time, but we're looking for a pragmatic approach that can seek agreement on some fundamental issues that could yield both cooperative technology and revenue sharing going forward.
Controversies over these sea boundaries is one of the factors inhibiting the realization of potential gas discoveries and their impact in the region. The importance of the discovery of hydrocarbon resources in the Near East in the 1930s and the increase in the importance of hydrocarbon fuels as the result of the Second World War and the subsequent rapid development of industrialized economies cannot be overstated. The existence of these resources, however, was unbalanced geographically and led to disparities in development in the region. Hydrocarbon producers in the Arab Gulf region prospered, while the more settled states of the Levant, including after 1948, the state of Israel, remained dependent on imported energy. As a result, the economic well-being was dictated by both the availability of those resources, which had at many times an important political component, as well as market forces, which determined the price paid for both current use as well as future development. Exploration in the Levant, specifically offshore in the Eastern Mediterranean, was pursued energetically. Positive results from these exploration efforts in the early years of the 21st century gave rise to expectations that finally, the crescent of states around the Eastern Mediterranean littoral would find greater economic opportunities and even greater security and stability. While some of these expectations have been realized, with the Leviathan and Zohr gas fields already up and running, others have been delayed because of politics and economics. Additionally, in the face of such vast new reserves of gas and the promise of huge economic benefit, states not part of these discoveries are scurrying to ensure that they will have access to abundant energy in the future. As we can already see how gas from Egypt and Israel has helped Jordan's economy, we have seen elsewhere in the world energy independence translates into economic growth and lessens the political influence of those who would use energy as a weapon.
Given my background, I will talk more about the techno-economic aspects of development of Eastmed gas. As you probably know, in terms of exploration and production, the Eastmed is at a standstill due to the postponement of activities by the international oil companies. They are in a state of crisis due to oversupply of oil and gas and subdued demand due to the impact of coronavirus on the global economies. The impact of this on the Eastmed is that COVID-19 not only has led to cancellation of drilling for gas, but also has affected gas development in general. The global gas industry was in trouble due to overproduction of gas and LNG much before COVID-19. The pandemic has made it worse. The economies of all countries around the Eastmed have been affected badly by COVID-19, and recovery will be challenging. But that has not stopped political turmoil. If anything, during these last few weeks, it has come back with vengeance. And the key issue remains EEZ disputes. And this is where Dr. Baroudhi's book is quite timely.
I'd like to thank the Transatlantic Leadership Network for the invitation to participate in today's panel. Thanks to Sasha and to Deborah for arranging everything. Before I begin, I'll give my little DoD disclaimer that whatever I say doesn't represent the National Defense University, the Department of Defense, or the United States government more generally. They're just my own views. However, speaking from the perspective of someone who works in the DoD every day, I want to start by mentioning that the Eastern Mediterranean has assumed a certain degree of importance for the United States, precisely because of some of the issues raised in Dr. Baroudhi's excellent book, not least energy discoveries and the geopolitical and geoeconomic implications resulting from them.
I think the resources in Egyptian and Israeli waters will continue to be developed. There is demand in those countries. And Israel can trade gas also with selling gas to Jordan now. It can sell some more probably to Egypt, maybe elsewhere. But the real problem is Cyprus. And unless they discover a lot more gas and companies are willing to take the investment risks because the potential returns are so great, there needs to be some coordination in the region. I agree, some solution or a path towards that on the island. As someone who worked on those issues 20 years ago, I can't say I'm optimistic, but we can still be hopeful. So it's really, it's an issue of economics, and it's an issue of political stability. And you don't really have either one in your favor now if you're Cyprus at the moment.
Now, those 21 countries that share the Mediterranean, they have only 16 treaties in place, including the one that was signed a couple of days ago between Greece and Italy. This region, especially the Eastmed, they used to, except for Egypt, they used to import most of their fossil fuels. And now they have a nice platform with science and law to be able to divide and to have a clean, unbiased, equal distance, exclusive economic zone partition among all of them, from Greece to Turkey, Syria, Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt too. Now, having said that, today's science can give us a 10-meter photography. Now, for example, in the 90s, when Cyprus and Egypt started their delineation, they used to do it upon the old imperial graphics cartography. today, if we use the technology, they will have even more state-of-the-art geography done. However, in the 1990s, there was no GPS to be used. And with this wealth that is in Zohar, for example, or Leviathan, or Cosmos and all, this will give a lot of freedom to the countries to have more hydrocarbons for their own use, for their power plants, use less coal power plant, and they will be able to assist more in social health care, education, and welfare for the nations. We are talking for the time being as estimated around 200 to 250 billion USD only from whatever they have already assessed there. And I am sure we need, as among all, the US to assist the nations that are not accepting yet the United Nations Law of the Sea, since all of the nations of the East Med and Euromed, they are all party to the United Nations Charter. They are all parties to the EU Euromed of Barcelona and Trieste. And I'm sure the US can definitely help, especially the State Department, as an honest broker to bring the parties in. There is a book where we can all sit down and make peace for energy use.
Yes, I mean, I defer to my colleagues' expertise on the gas issue, but just from sort of on the anecdotal level, in the Cypriot context, in a Greek context, there's been a little bit of a kind of up and down of, oh wow, there's so much gas, we're going to be Dubai, we're going to be Qatar, we're going to be so wealthy. I mean, there's gas there, but it's not like that. And I think a degree of realism of, you know, these countries are not going to become Qatar. They're not going to become UAE. They're not even going to become Azerbaijan in terms of the money that is feasible out of this. But they can use that actually to adopt a more realistic perspective on what they can get out of these resources.
I'd like to turn to Dr. Baroudi. In addition to your extensive research and thorough discussion of territorial waters and economic zones, you've also written about what I consider one of the most extremely important subjects of energy diversity and independence that both you and Deputy Assistant Secretary Donnelly have talked about. Many in our audience today are committed to ensuring that countries have been so reliant on energy imports, often from just a single or very few sources, have the opportunity to change the dynamic for themselves. When countries are spending 60 to 70% of their GDP on energy imports, there has to be a better way to free up those assets for more important development in those countries. And so I think the development of gas flows from the Leviathan and Jor gas plays have a way to fundamentally change the dynamic in these countries. And as we know, there are still almost 900 million people in this world who have no access to electricity. And that problem alone is significant because it means less women and children can go to school, can change their dynamic because they spend all their time gathering fuel for fires, for cooking. It means less resources to educate underserved and disenfranchised members of society. And so one of the most exciting things about these energy flows coming online is how it's going to affect this. And so Dr. Baroudi, may I ask that you talk a little bit, as you did in your book, about how the dynamic effect this will have in terms of employment, education, and even access to regular electricity versus sometimes there, sometimes not there. How do you think it will affect these countries, and whether you think this will contribute to stability, not only in this region, but within the individual countries themselves?
Deborah, thank you very much for a long but very interesting question. First of all, most of the East Med, except for Egypt that has an oil and gas industry that is as old as 120, 125 years old, all of the other nations were almost 90 and 97% dependent of importing the fossil fuel. Now with this wealth in Zohor, Leviathan, Plistos, and all, and the future to come will definitely help most of the region, their dependency on fossil fuel, and that will relieve them from the burdens of this big budget for each countries that we have there. You have to remember that the East Med, they needed a lot of assistance and foreign aid in order to do all of the minimum requirement for social support. Now, this wealth, once they will have, and they will have it for their own use and for their export, will definitely assist social security, healthcare, education, and one of them is, like you are saying, the sustainable electricity at a very reasonable cost. But also the most important thing, this wealth will fight poverty. And poverty is the only way to fight terrorism. Terrorism, unfortunately, within the region is ramping everywhere. And the terrorism is coming because of our poverty. Now, like Deputy Assistant Secretary Connolly said, and Ambassador Moore said about the rights of fishery and all. Now, the Mediterranean, they have almost 23 active volcanoes. They have 44 dormant. And what do we know? And I am sure Ambassador Moore knows more, that all of the residues from volcanoes, they have a lot of minerals like manganese, gold, nickel, etc. So it is not just the fishery wealth, it is not only the oil and gas wealth, it's also the minerals that are there. And with the use of law in a very peaceful way, in a very diplomatic way, with a dialogue, this will assist the whole countries of the region to solve their problems in a peaceful way and according to the United Nations law of the book, since they are all participants there.
As part of our ongoing commitment to contribute to the success of the Eastern Mediterranean, TLN has launched East Med Quarterly Newsletter, a platform to share forward-thinking ideas how to tackle problems the region is continuing to face. I'd like to thank TLN Distinguished Energy Fellow, Deborah Kagan, for co-editing the newsletter with me. And thank you, Jonathan Roberts, TLN Project Manager, and your team for putting it together in that brilliant way. For those who didn't have a chance to read it, please visit our website at transatlantic.org. Besides great discussion awaiting us today, this event marks yet another remarkable occasion, a launching of foreign language ebook editions of Dr. Baroudi's Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean, The Way Forward publication. It is the first ever foreign language editions, both for the TLN and for the Brookings Institution Press. And I'd like to congratulate all and thank the great people from Brookings Press that worked tirelessly and committedly to bring this to light.